All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome. I see we got folks joining. I think it's right before noon Eastern, so we'll give everyone a moment to join. Hope everyone is having a good Thursday. I think it's Thursday and it's March again, so that's awesome. Welcome, everyone, wherever you are in the world. Hopefully you are having a wonderful week. Let's go ahead and get things kicked off here. Hi, everyone. I am Katie Nichols. I'm an instructor for SANS, the Cyber Threat Intelligence course. I'm also Director of Intelligence at Red Canary, and this is the monthly SANS Threat Analysis Rundown, the STAR Webcast. If you haven't joined us before, monthly series, and I am really excited to have a little reunion. Two of my former teammates, current friends, Jen Burns and Adam Pennington will be joining us in a moment to talk through some different MITRE ATT&CK techniques and updates that they've made since the SolarWinds series of things. So that's going to be our deep dive topic for today. So let's get right into it. This is a monthly webcast. If you haven't joined us before, our goal is to just bring you different voices on what's going on in the threat landscape. Lots of things, so I have different guests joining us every month to give you that inside scoop. We are going to kick off a little rundown of a few things that I'd recommend kind of checking out from the news lately in terms of threats. Then I'll pass it off to Jen and Adam for a deep dive into their topic of the day. And we'll wrap up. You have some homework, as always, some action items, and a go-do type of things. So rundown, as always, it has been a busy week. I don't know about anyone else, but I would really like to go to a desert island away from computers for like a month someday. So obviously the news this week has been the Exchange vulnerabilities. So patch, I've heard from a couple people who are administering Exchange servers that of course that's easier said than done. So obviously you want to patch. These 4 vulnerabilities are pretty serious. Anyone who has Exchange facing the internet, want to make sure that you patch immediately, but also check out, see if there's any post-exploitation activity. There's some great blog posts, and I have references at the end of these slides, which will be posted, and this is being recorded. So you can check out these references later. Obviously, the big one was the blog post from Microsoft on the suspected Chinese state-sponsored group they call Hafnium. But one word of caution that I wanted to call out, looks like now that these vulnerabilities are known, a lot of different groups are starting to exploit them. So watch out for the challenge of just lumping everything together in like, hey, if an adversary is exploiting this vulnerability, they're Hafnium, so it's China. Watch out for that trap. So check out that Microsoft blog post, but beware that, hey, there might be other adversaries who are exploiting these vulnerabilities. ESET tweeted out yesterday, I have a link to that at the end as well, that they've seen 4 or 5 different groups exploiting them. So definitely look for this. The good news about this activity is that it's very detectable. A lot of activity that my team has seen has been China Chopper web shells, which China Chopper has been around like 8, 9 years something. So if you look for web shells, there's a good chance you'll catch that post-exploitation activity. But definitely take that one seriously. Any Exchange vulnerability is not great. So obviously the big news this week. Another one I wanted to highlight, there's an appliance called Excellion File Transfer Appliance, FTA. And last week, mostly, there were a few reports, but then different governments coming together to talk about how vulnerabilities in the file transfer appliance have been exploited by a few different adversaries. There's an interesting post out from FireEye last week talking about how one of their uncategorized groups, one of their UNCs, actually was sending extortion emails that looked like they were from Clop ransomware operators. So saying you're ransomed, but then they had actually stolen data using a web shell through an Excellion vulnerability. So kind of a weird thing. But if you have Excellion FTA, definitely check that out. Check out that reporting, again, linked at the end. Another item I'd recommend looking out for. A lot of vulnerabilities, that's the name of the game. Another one, on a broader note, this sort of annual report season, which is kind of fun. I want to give a shout out to the team at PwC. They have this amazing annual report. I think it's like 60 pages, full of lots of details of various threats they've seen over the past year. I know there's an attack section that I really liked. So PwC, Dragos has their report out on the ICS side. CrowdStrike has a great report, and many, many others. So those annual reports, my team is working on ours, and like they're a lot of work. So shout out, thank you to everyone who does those. And I highly recommend taking some time to read those, maybe on the weekend with a cup of tea, because they're chock full of information about what threats are doing. So thank you to everyone who's working on those. And last but not least, this is super nerdy, but if you didn't catch the Senate Intelligence Committee hearing on SolarWinds last week, it's really nerdy, but I would recommend going back and like watching that. It's a few hours, or at least reading summaries of it. I was super impressed. I know like technical people on the cybersecurity side, sometimes we kind of like to poke fun at policymakers for the questions they ask, but I was super impressed with the questions senators asked, really on point with like what key issues in cybersecurity are. That hearing touched on everything from like, do firewalls matter, to like, why didn't people catch this, to issues of deterrence and larger policy issues. So really, really interesting hearing. If you like international relations stuff or policy stuff, or are just interested in learning more about that, highly recommend watching that Senate hearing. So yeah, I know, exciting stuff. All right, obviously a lot else going on, but just a few highlights of things I'd recommend you check out from the past week or so. And with that, let's get right on to our deep dive. So I am so excited to welcome Jen Burns and Adam Pennington from the MITRE Corporation. I've known Jen and Adam for a while, so as many of you know, I used to be on the MITRE ATT&CK team, so worked with them day to day. And so I'm super grateful that I still count them as friends and colleagues in this broader industry fight. And so really, really excited to invite them. And they're going to be talking about thinking through all of this SolarWinds stuff, right? We've heard about SolarWinds for so long now, but I found that I was so overwhelmed by all the reporting and everything going on that I don't know that I really took the time to understand the techniques involved. And when I was thinking through like, who can explain new techniques and what we should be paying attention to, I was like, well, obviously Jen and Adam. So take it away, Jen, Adam, welcome, and lay your knowledge on us.
Awesome. Thank you, Katie. So I'm Jen Burns. I'm the lead of Attack for Cloud. Very excited to talk to you folks today about SolarWinds and what we did with Attack to kind of, allow you to look through that lens of Attack to see what happened. And I'll go ahead and actually pass it over to Adam Pennington to kick us off.
Hi, and I'm Adam Pennington. I'm the overall Attack lead, and wanted to start off by talking about the journey, hoping to take you through today. So going to get into a little bit of what we've been seeing the past several months with a lot of the flood of reporting that's come out around this. I'm not sure the term Katie used, a SolarWinds series of things. Talk about some new techniques, pass it over to Jen, where we've seen a lot in the cloud space around this particular series of intrusions, and then get into some of what was familiar in all this and some fertile hunting grounds that you might have in looking for this adversary and looking for other similar adversaries in the future. So just to recap some history that I think most people are probably somewhat familiar with at this point. On a Sunday in December, there had been some rumors going around, a little bit of press reporting that something might have happened. But FireEye released a report that a new actor they were talking about, UNC2452, had compromised a product called SolarWinds Orion, and a series of intrusions had resulted. Now, over time, we've learned that there were other entry points. There were things that didn't involve SolarWinds at all, despite the name being associated in with a lot of this. And it appeared to be a pretty advanced actor, with a lot of people pointing fingers at Russia, but not necessarily knowing back to an existing intrusion set. And so one report on a Sunday would be one thing, but we actually had sort of a series come out that day. Microsoft had been taking part in the incident response and posted from their visibility where some of their cloud infrastructure had been involved. SolarWinds confirmed it, and we saw DHS putting out their own directive as well. But so that wasn't at all the end of it. Over the next couple months, the flood continued. So we saw people doing really good work looking at malware analysis, picking apart pieces of this. Velexity realized that the actor that had being talked about was one that they'd called Dark Halo, or potentially the same actor had been looking at through a couple of other campaigns besides just this one, and added a bunch of information that also may be associated with this actor. And we just saw a series of reports coming out. So I think, like a lot of people, we were struggling to keep up with this flood. We're trying to look across a lot of these, keep up with them, understand what's going on. Looked around to see if anyone was tracking these in public that we could just borrow. Didn't see it, so we decided to do it ourselves. So we launched originally a blog post in Medium. And I should say that all of the work talking about today is a much bigger team than just Jen and I. This is work from across the attack team, sort of all hands on deck. And so we started tracking in Medium the reports we were seeing coming out. But similar to a lot of the blogs we've been trying to track ourselves, we realized that Medium might not be the best medium for this, where it's hard for people to see what we were changing, doing updates. And so we moved everything into GitHub. And so we've put that out in public, and I swear this QR code is legit and will get you to the report tracking as well as the URL shortened on there. But it is important to understand that we are not tracking everything from everyone that has been said about the SolarWinds series of things. We're looking specifically at resources directly analyzing intrusion data. So that's either people that are incident responders with hands-on data from what the actors actually did, people that are analyzing samples, people that are looking at domain infrastructure, rather than meta-analysis or just advice. And our current tracking, I think this is correct as of today, we're tracking 46 resources from 17 different sources. And there are actually probably a couple hundred, if not more, reports out there in total. But these are the ones we thought captured the scope of what's known about what happened. So why are we tracking on all these reports? Why do we care about these behaviors? And so I guess a lot of people probably have heard of attack at this point, but the important pieces of it that are why we're tracking this is that attack is a knowledge base of adversary behaviors based on real world observations. And so we track these real world observations to understand what adversaries are doing. We also keep track of adversary groups and software. It's actually work that Katie used to lead when she was the lead at MITRE. And looking at the behaviors that each of those groups have been seen to do in public reporting. So what we found across this flood of reports, we saw several new techniques we hadn't seen in reporting before. It's not unusual for us to see a single new technique in a report. Somebody tries out something new in the wild, but seeing this many from a single intrusion campaign was a bit unusual. This did appear to be a really advanced actor compared to a lot of what we see. We saw several more things that adversaries were doing that were almost things we already described, but were slightly out of scope of existing techniques. And we saw new procedures. We saw new ways of doing different techniques, different behaviors that these actors did. One of the things we also noticed in the reporting is that much of the reported activity involved cloud services. So I'd like to turn it over to Jen to talk a little bit about Attack for Cloud, how we're actually tracking activities that happen in the cloud, as well as the new techniques that we actually saw from this particular intrusion.
Awesome. Thanks, Adam. So like Adam mentioned, we did add some new techniques into attack based on SolarWinds, most of them being of, I guess, what we call a cloudy nature. But to start, I actually want to give a bit of a background on Attack for Cloud itself. Oh, I think Adam, there we go. All right. So enterprise attack has been around many years now. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it, like Adam mentioned, but cloud platforms weren't added to attack until October of 2019, which although seems like a decade ago now, was really only a little over a year ago. So this is still a pretty fairly new space in attack. Attack for Cloud was added as a part of Enterprise Attack. So unlike Attack for Mobile and Attack for Industrial Control Systems, which were added as separate domains, this is kind of part of Enterprise Attack as a whole. And right now it includes the AWS, GCP, and Azure platforms, although in the near future, we're actually consolidating those platforms into a single infrastructure as a service platform. But it also covers Office 365, Azure AD, and software as a service in general, which is where we'll find more of the focus today. Like the rest of Enterprise Attack, as Adam also mentioned, it's based on real-world observations of adversaries. So it's not like a theoretical collection of all the things that adversaries can do. It's based on what adversaries are actually doing in the wild. So I'm sure a lot of folks that work in the cloud space can probably relate when I say it's difficult to find open source intelligence or reporting on what's actually going on in the cloud. So with SolarWinds, this is actually kind of a rare exception to that. But due to kind of that lack of open source reporting, Attack for Cloud was originally almost 100% contributed by the security community, including a cloud service provider, threat analysts, detection analysts with in the wild visibility into what adversaries are doing, and also some red teams that helped scope some of the techniques. So when all of the intel started coming down the pipeline about SolarWinds, the first thing we wanted to do as an attack team was determine if we have any gaps in attack that need to be filled based on new adversary behaviors that hadn't been seen before in the wild. Like Adam mentioned, it turns out that a lot of those new behaviors were related to the cloud. And how did we kind of, come to that conclusion? Well, we started analyzing the intel. We also received some contributions, a few from someone near and dear to us, Blake Strom, who was the original creator of Attack and now works for Microsoft. Another about specifically the Golden SAML attack that the adversaries used that I'll discuss a bit later. That was contributed by Oleg Kolesnikov of SecureOnyx. But based on that intel and the contributions we received, we first mapped the behaviors we found to current attack techniques. And that's really when we realized we had some gaps, particularly in the cloud space. So the cloud team worked with the rest of the enterprise attack team to figure out how those gaps could be filled. And ultimately that work led to a point release of Attack in late January. And that included these new techniques as well as updates to existing attack techniques, and then also mappings to that threat group UNC 2452. So to start to dig into some of the new behaviors we found related to SolarWinds, this is a graphic provided by Microsoft in one of their reports, specifically about the SolarGate campaign. And I want to talk a bit about the last piece here, which is the hands-on keyboard attack in the cloud, as they call it. This is where we found almost all of the new behaviors that we added to Attack. So at a high level, the move into the cloud during SolarGate was dependent on this ability the adversaries had to mint SAML tokens, which is kind of that piece in the middle here. But what the heck are SAML tokens, at least in this context, and why were they so important to the adversary's objectives? In a nutshell, SAML tokens are one way for authentication and authorization to be exchanged between trusted parties. It's one mechanism that's behind something like federated single sign-on, and it can make life a little bit easier for us so we don't have to use multiple usernames and passwords for all of the services we use to just do our jobs. It makes our lives easier, but it can also open up some opportunities for adversaries, as evidenced kind of by this campaign. This minting or forging of SAML tokens was a crucial piece during SolarGate in particular, to give adversaries access to cloud environments that use and trust SAML tokens for auth. There's already some good reading on this out there, so I won't go step by step through a Golden SAML attack, but if you haven't checked out the reading materials from like Splunk, Signia, and others talking about it, I'd highly recommend it to kind of get a better idea of what happened here. To get to that point of forging SAML tokens, though, there are a couple different paths that the adversaries took, and I'll talk about each one briefly give you an idea of how the behaviors map to attack. So for what Microsoft calls path 1 here, the adversary stole an already established and trusted SAML signing key, or what you'll often be here called a token signing certificate, that already belonged to whatever organization they were targeting at the time. One way that they did this was through extracting that token signing certificate from the organization's Active Directory Federation Services server, which is kind of a mouthful, after gaining administrative privileges within that organization's on-premises network. This gave the adversaries the capability to basically make any SAML token they wanted with any permission claims and lifetimes that was then considered valid to all the cloud services or the apps available to the identity specified in the SAML token. Because those cloud services and apps assume that multi-factor authentication is kind of a necessary previous step to creating a properly signed token. Although, with the forging of SAML tokens, the adversaries are actually kind of bypassing MFA in this case. So how does this behavior relate to attack? When we were reading through this, the team realized that this ultimately was just a new procedure for the unsecured credentials private keys sub-technique that was already in attack. So this didn't warrant a new technique or sub-technique. And moving on to path 2 below in this graphic, first, the adversaries gained administrative Azure AD privileges. So this is different from that on-premise privileges used for path 1, using compromised credentials. And then they added their own signing certificate in the domain by either adding a new federation trust to an existing tenant or modifying the properties of an existing federation trust. And then this allowed them to create, once again, any SAML token they'd like and sign it with their own token signing certificate since it's trusted in the domain. For that first technique of gaining administrative privileges in Azure AD with compromised credentials, that's just a valid accounts technique in attack. And then that next behavior of generating a new SAML signing key or certificate, that's actually a sub-technique in the resource development tactic of attack called develop capabilities. That's really a behavior that was most likely carried out within the adversary's own infrastructure versus the compromised organization, which is one of the reasons that we would map this to a technique within what we consider to be the pre-platform of enterprise attack. But what about this creating a new or modifying an existing federation trust? This was something we didn't yet have documented in attack. We couldn't really find a great place for it. And then just that minting of the SAML tokens. That didn't fit an attack either at the time. There was this idea of the golden SAML attack going back to researchers from CyberArk that published about it in 2017. But to our knowledge, this was the first time it had been used in the wild. So this pushed us towards adding this technique into attack. The usage of that SAML token, though, to then pivot into the cloud environment, we would consider that to be use alternate authentication material. And this is kind of an interesting technique because, as I mentioned, it bypasses multi-factor authentication. I think one observation I've personally gathered from all of this is that MFA, multi-factor authentication, it's not a silver bullet, so to speak. Of course, that doesn't mean as defenders, we should kind of throw our hands up in the air, say MFA is useless, but it's definitely a good reminder that we need to consider how to detect and mitigate anomalous behavior in this auth space that's separate from using usernames, passwords, or MFA. So, So you'll recall there were a couple question marks on that last slide since we didn't have technique coverage for a couple of behaviors. So as a team, we decided to create some new sub-techniques. For that new or modified domain trust behavior that Microsoft mentioned, we took a technique that was originally named group policy modification. We decided to expand its scope and renamed it to domain policy modification. And we created a sub-technique called domain trust modification to address this specific behavior of adding new domain trusts or modifying an existing domain trust. Then for that minting of SAML tokens and separate reporting, there was actually a behavior documented related to forging web cookies. So we created the technique of forge web credentials to cover both those cases, and then made the forging of SAML tokens its own sub-technique to cover that golden SAML type behavior. All right, that was fun. All righty. So now I'll dig a bit into the actions that adversaries carried out after moving into the cloud using those forged SAML tokens. Overall, we had attack coverage in this space already, so no new techniques or sub-techniques here, but I'll just briefly talk through these behaviors and how they relate to attack. With that ability created to forge those SAML tokens for any identity, really the adversaries had the ability to move beyond the confines of any on-premises persistence they may have, and it just really opened up this entire new space for them. As you'd probably expect, once the adversaries had access to the cloud environment through forging tokens, they first tried to determine what accounts or identities might be useful for them. So really what accounts could allow them to ultimately do something like gain access to email content. For attack purposes, this is just ultimately account discovery. And then the next action after kind of figuring out which accounts may help their objectives was to add their own additional credentials to service principals or OAuth apps accessible to those accounts. Adding their own credentials allowed them to abuse API access that already existed for those particular service principals or apps. We already had this sub-technique called account manipulation, additional cloud credentials and attack that covered this behavior, but we did clarify the language in the technique a bit. So it was understood that the credentials could be added for service principals or applications. We found that as folks kind of started mapping this behavior to attack, they would often map this particular behavior to something else, like that use alternate authentication material technique, which to an extent could be accurate as well. But that additional cloud credential sub-technique was actually written originally to cover specifically this type of case in Azure AD. So we wanted to make sure that it was obvious that this sub-technique existed for folks to use and map to. Then once the adversaries were able to abuse the API access that those existing service principals or applications had through the Microsoft Graph API, they were able to basically impersonate those apps to collect emails remotely from Exchange Online if those apps had the mail.read or mail.read-write permissions. They were also able to sometimes modify permissions to add mail read or read write if they didn't initially exist for that application. And we kind of discussed it back and forth and decided that ultimately, this collective behavior was just the existing sub-technique of remote email collection and attack. So as I mentioned earlier, to kind of recap, we updated that account manipulation, additional cloud credentials sub-technique to make sure that it covered adding credentials for service principals and applications. We just wanted to make sure it was super clear that applications were included here. We hope that it would kind of make this behavior more clear to the reader so that mapping that behavior to attack would make it more straightforward and easier to do. So just quickly, what other techniques did we update or change based on SolarWinds for our latest attack release? Briefly mentioned earlier that there was also forging of web cookies that was documented in a different set of reporting, which again allowed a bypass of MFA. So that sub-technique was added under forged web credentials. Then as I also mentioned, we ended up changing the scope of the group policy modification technique to include all domain policy modifications. And we moved group policy modification, that original technique, into its own sub-technique. We wanted to make sure that we didn't completely reinvent the wheel here. So folks that were already mapping to that original group policy modification technique didn't get blindsided with this change. So hopefully this rearrangement of the technique makes sense to folks. So overall, that's the entire span of what Microsoft called the hands-on keyboard attack in the cloud for SolarGate. With those updates to attack, we now have an end-to-end mapping here. We also added mitigations and detections to those new techniques based on recommendations and reporting. Hopefully those are helpful to folks. And I just want to give a big thanks to Microsoft for making this graphic. Definitely a visual learner, so it made it so much more clear and easy to map to than it could have been otherwise. So hopefully this is helpful to other folks as well. And with that, I'll actually, excuse me, turn it over to Adam to talk about some of the more familiar pieces of the intrusions related to SolarWinds and what you can do with all this information.
Yeah, thank you, Jen. So that was what was new, what we saw that was, created from the adversary, things that we hadn't really seen come into this before. But what was familiar here? Well, for one, supply chain compromised software supply chain was already in attack. So getting into supply chain modifying an updater, getting into that stream, is actually something we've seen multiple times over the past decade. It's not that common. We assume it takes a lot of resources for someone to do this. So it's not an everyday problem, but it is something that is familiar to us. Not only that, it's not even that new of something to think about. So the details that came out over time with SolarWinds were that the adversary got into their build environment, was actually swapping out some source code during the compile process. And this concept of subverting a piece of software by getting into the build process is actually very similar to what was described in Reflections on Trusting Trust. This is a 1984 paper that came from Ken Thompson's 1983 Turing Award lecture. And it talked about the concept of getting into the build system to subvert a piece of software. And so almost 40 years we've had some concept of this. It's just this was a bit of a spectacular case of its use. Even some of the malware that was used in the intrusion was familiar. We saw the adversary in a number of places reportedly using Cobalt Strike, which has been very popular with state actors. It's been seen across a ton of ransomware activity. And so it's something that should be on people's radar already. So I wanted to go all the way up from sort of getting in the details of the techniques all the way out to the 50,000 foot view of what we saw across attack. This is almost certainly going to be too small for you to read the individual technique names unless you've got a really nice big monitor. But really what to look at here is sort of the amount of red. These are all the different techniques that going across the reporting that the attack team's been able to work with so far, from UNC2452, raindrop malware, teardrop malware, sunspot, and sunburst malware. And so these are the pieces of malware that appear to be unique to this campaign. And so obviously you can see there's a lot of red here. It's not just a couple things. It's not just supply chain. This adversary did a broad set of activities. And they did do a lot that was new for a single campaign. But the green here is the part that we added to attack just for this campaign. And so it's only a very small portion of their activity that was completely new and novel for us to see from an existing actor. And to turn that into numbers a bit, so what do we know, and what might we still be missing in this picture? So that slide just showed you 73 existing techniques and 4 new techniques from the actor and these sets of malware. And so it's a pretty good number of new techniques that create opportunities for other places to look for this adversary and actors like them. Now, not based on seeing how much the tactics are colored in. One of the things about attack is that it is not something like the cyber kill chain where you expect an adversary to do every tactic. Adversaries pick and choose. They might be in different orders. But looking at the actual reporting, it appears that we don't know everything about what this actor did for lateral movement. There appear to be gaps in how they got around in environments, how they did collection, and exfiltration, so how they were actually gathering stuff to send it out the door, assuming that was their goal in these intrusions. And we don't, left of exploitation, before exploitation, we don't know anything about the reconnaissance. We don't really know how they picked these victims, how they checked them out ahead of time, how they decided on SolarWinds. And so these are all still intelligence gaps in the picture we're looking at. So I said it was 73 techniques. So shouldn't every single victim have had 73 alerts going off if they, were following their attack best practices? No. This was, among other things, a very advanced actor using new procedures, but there are some other reasons too. This is a compilation of many reports. In fact, some of the material we're talking about in here is very specific to particular victims. So only a portion of this is going to naturally be seen at each victim. So if you're not SolarWinds, you're not going to see the exact piece of software that was trying to get into the Orion build chain. You're not going to see that hash in your environment. And you probably are going to see something a little bit customized to another product if they ever go down the same path. Many of these techniques are useful for hunting and not alerting. And this is true of attack in general. So attack describes adversary behavior. So these are things that are potentially common from adversaries, but also common from software, from admins, from users. And so we may have PowerShell highlighted as a technique that this adversary did. Don't create an alert every time PowerShell is seen to run anywhere in your environment. You will hate us. And we really don't want to see the email from that. Blake Strom and some of the other people from the attack team from 2017 wrote a paper I think a lot of people haven't seen on hunting with attack that talks about the different types of analytics and techniques in attack, and talks about this idea of some things are useful for alerting, some things are useful for hunting. Unfortunately, which is which depends a lot on your own environment and what's common for you. And so while we did see common techniques on a lot of these, we also did see new procedures. So the exact thing the adversary was doing was often new here, even if they were doing a higher level behavior that we've seen in other cases. And I included in here a quote from FireEye, who has seen some things. This is some of the best operational security that FireEye has observed in a cyber attack, focusing on evasion and leveraging inherent trust. However, it can be detected through persistent defense. And we'd agree with both halves of that this was really good. They went to a lot of efforts to evade defenses. But there are some opportunities for still hunting and seeing these guys. So some general hunting strategies working through things like the attack techniques that we've put out. Supply chain compromise was the headline behavior of this intrusion. It's something that doesn't happen every day. It's expensive, but it's also probably one of the hardest behaviors in here to actually detect. And so look at the other behaviors that follow the supply chain initial access. A lot of them are more familiar than stuff like the supply chain in general. Focus on techniques from portions of the intrusion relevant to you. Like I said a couple slides ago, you probably don't need to look at Sunspot if you aren't a supplier. And this exact version of Sunspot is only relevant if you are SolarWinds and are compiling Orion. And so it's, the general behaviors are familiar, but you need to be a little bit careful on how far you go onto the details of what you're worried about in your own environment. And as we advise in a lot of spaces with attack, start looking at behaviors you can see with data you already have. So, instead of setting up giant collection infrastructure to get just that one technique you really want to see, start out looking for the things that you probably have in your SIM today. The things that you can create analytics for right away and be able to see. So it's also important, especially with an actor like this who is doing very specific activities that are not the norm, to look all the way down to the procedure level, not just the technique. And so many of UNC 2452's procedures are not the most common ones. So for a fairly simple example, archive collected data, archive via utility. Most cases, most actors, this means they used RAR. I don't know why RAR is so popular across a lot of actors, but in most actors I've seen, if they're compressing stuff, getting ready to send it out the door, it's probably RAR. Well, it wasn't RAR. UNC2452 used 7-zip. Now, 7-zip's not that exotic, not that unusual. I have it on my own system, but it is a little bit different behavior. And they actually used it in two different places that we're seeing. I believe first case was from Velexity seeing it in an earlier campaign, but it was also used in distribution of some of the malware downstream. And encourage you to go all the way back to the original reporting, looking at these procedures. And so that's what the links are at the end here, getting you back to that Velexity report and even the full command line. You might not want to hyper focus on the really specific directory that they got into, but you can at least see some of the flags they potentially like and how they're actually executing 7-zip in the first place. So another procedure that's a little bit higher up, indicator removal on host. Usually what that technique involves is deleting logs, deleting the malware that was put down, clearing stuff out of Windows temp. They did something a little bit different here. And so looking at sort of the second half of that, because this is doing the same behavior, but two different procedures put together from two different reports. They temporarily replaced legitimate utilities with their own, executed the payload, and then restored the original file. So, what they were doing was making their malware have the same file name as something completely legitimate in the system, running it, and then erasing the evidence. And so this is probably a little bit different pattern than you might be already looking for if you were just looking for people cleaning out files from the Windows temp directory. And so we think there are a number of takeaways that come from this overall event and some of the things that can be done about it. So this was a skilled actor, and they had some really interesting new techniques, especially in the cloud space that Jen worked into, a lot of new procedures. But this was also an actor who used many familiar techniques. And while supply chain itself as a technique is probably really expensive, a little bit rare, we will probably see all of these again. So while this is useful space to be hunting for, was I part of the SolarWinds series of things, it's also useful going forward in looking for future activity. Cloud resources provide many new adversary opportunities. It's a space we as a community maybe have not focused on quite enough, looking at how much work, how much stuff is going into the cloud today. But the upside with, and thanks to Microsoft and others for how much reporting has come out on this, with campaigns like this one, we get a better idea what to watch there. When there is reporting out there on what actual adversaries are doing in the cloud, we get a little bit better feel for where it is we need to look. And finally, supply chain tech injection is tough, but there are many other hunting opportunities downstream and maybe upstream from the actual supply chain injection. And pay attention to procedures, especially with an actor like this who is not doing the specific method of executing a technique that we see most commonly. The details really matter if we want to catch this particular actor. So this is links to all of the resources that we've put out around this. I believe Katie's been sharing out links, and we'll make sure that our slides get out as well. So if you're trying to furiously scribble these down, don't worry about it. While we had you, we wanted to get one more thing in here, sort of Steve Jobs style. So for just a wrap up, I'm going to turn it back over real quick to Jen.
Awesome. Yeah, so in a completely different vein, the attack team is working with MITRE Ingenuity and the Center for Threat Informed Defense to develop what we're calling Attack for Containers. We have a first draft and a blog post out about it with more information. We're looking to answer really a few more questions about adversary behavior in the container space before we ultimately add that content into attack. And one of those questions is whether or not adversary behavior in the space ever leads to something other than crypto mining. So this is really just another plea out to the community while we have you. If you have visibility into what adversaries are doing in the containers space, please let us know. You can shoot us an email at attack@mitre.org. And we're also, of course, open to any other feedback you might have on this draft. So please feel free to reach out at any point. And with that, thanks so much for having us today. This is our website, attack.mitre.org. Like I mentioned, you can reach out at attack@mitre.org or reach out to any of us on Twitter. And I'll turn it back over to Katie.
Excellent. Thank you both so much. Getting a lot of love in the Q&A. George just dropped in just to say he didn't have a question, but just a reminder that you're awesome. So that was really helpful. And I kind of wish that I would have had you just like telling me all of this throughout this entire thing, because it's been a rough few months struggling. But I think this helped me kind of contextualize all the things we're seeing and like what's new and what's not. And so at this point, we have a couple minutes, yay, for questions. We have a few good ones that came in. And so if anyone has questions, drop those in the Q&A panel in Zoom. And we are happy to talk through as many of those as we possibly can. So first one is an attack specific question. The attack v8.2 update, which I would just note if you're not familiar that versioning, it's really helpful because the first number, the 8 is a major version update, and then the .2 is a minor version. So the question was that 8.2 update based entirely on new techniques identified in the SolarWinds investigation, or was there other goodness in there?
It was based entirely on the SolarWinds information. We have other ongoing techniques that'll be coming out. Our goal is next major release version 9 of attack to be April, but we scoped this specifically, and we did it because we saw so much new activity from this specific series of intrusions. And there was just so much interest in sort of looking for it, and where we had bigger gaps than we normally see from a single set of intrusions. We really just wanted to get that in there sooner rather than later. And so I really appreciate the work that both the attack team and our infrastructure team put in to manage to cherry pick out those techniques, because it's actually not all that easy on the back end for us to scoop out a piece of attack.
Excellent. And I'll drop in the reply to that question, and I'll also drop it in chat if you want more info on like updates and versions. This is another really cool thing that the team did. Like when there's a change to version 9, like you can go back and look at previous versions. So I know the infrastructure team did a ton of work on that. So that's really useful as well. So excellent. I love this next question, talking about how CTI teams can kind of help others, like threat hunting teams. So any recommendations, like as a CTI team, right? You look at these new techniques. How do we inform the threat hunting team or anyone else who's trying to hunt? Any ideas for like, how do you have that communication?
I mean, honestly, that's a question I might even ask of you as sort of expertise.
No, you're not allowed to do that.
I'm not going to. But I think that you're making sure that you know your consumer, that you're tailoring the information that you're putting out to be useful to the team that you're aiming for. So, we're being your threat hunting team, making sure that you're getting down to a level of description that is what they need to be able to look for the specific behavior, trying to contextualize it. So giving an idea of where they might be looking for specific things. So, something like the SolarWinds, understanding that you have techniques and behaviors and maybe pieces of malware that you probably would only ever see in a build system. So making sure that the context doesn't get divorced from it. We often see with people using attack, people putting out piles of techniques. So, something that doesn't go beyond kind of the big red attack graphic that I gave earlier. And that's not necessarily useful, especially depending on who you are as a consumer. And so we're showing that level of detail in a slide, but there is more behind it. There's the specific procedures, there's the context, there's the reporting it came from. And pulling just the techniques away from that loses what your threat hunting team's probably going to need to actually be able to do that.
Yeah, and that question came in well before your last few slides. So I think to foot stomp those last few slides, getting down to that procedure level of like, hey, are they using 7-zip? What are the flags that you can use? And yeah, we're LCTI nerds here. Let's be honest, like knowing your consumers, what's useful to them. I just would give a big +1 for that. So hopefully some helpful things, especially towards the end, to help threat analysts, threat intel analysts communicate with hunters. Love it. All right, so next one. Do we know anything about initial compromise? And this is where like that GitHub repo has been enormously helpful to me because, as you said, like there have been so many reports on this and I can't keep track. I haven't seen anything public on how the initial thing started. Have either of you seen anything publicly on that? I don't think we know. I think that's an intel gap still.
I believe that's an intel gap, and there has been. So we know what the second kill chain looked like. We know what the initial access looks like on sort of the end victims, at least in the cases where it was Orion. We don't even know that much about what happened in the cases where it wasn't. And so there's a number of reports that say there were other intrusion vectors. We don't really know much about what those were. And then what happened at SolarWinds itself, I hope there's another CrowdStrike report that's able to answer that. Maybe an intel gap for them too. But there's been some public speculation that I don't want to repeat, but it's but it is an intel gap where I don't think anyone actually knows right now.
Yeah. And I think one of the interesting things, I mentioned that Senate hearing, I think they said like, this is an ongoing investigation. Like this is going to take months to unfurl. The other thing I wanted to highlight about what you just said, Adam, and this is again, like super CTI nerd and modeling and framework stuff, but like there are multiple kill chains here, right? If your SolarWinds, you have one kill chain and like that's the intel gap of their initial access. But then for like all the victims and like anyone who was compromised through the SolarWinds supply chain compromise, like the supply chain compromise was their initial access. So that's where I think like combining frameworks, combining attack and kill chain can be really valuable because you can start to be like, yeah, okay, we know initial access for us was through SolarWinds, but their initial access, TBD based on what I've seen. So we shall see. All right, I knew this question was going to happen and hopefully we get a chance to like chat about attribution a little bit. Is it Russia? So I will say in what I've seen publicly, I haven't seen anything from Microsoft, from FireEye, from Velexity saying Russia. And I think it's super significant, like as Adam and Jen talked about, that FireEye tracks this as an UNC. So Jen or Adam, you've read all the reporting. Have you seen anything saying Russia?
I have not.
There's some government reporting saying Russia, but yeah, everyone seems to be sort of holding their breath and waiting for, so we're just talking kill chains, waiting for enough to fill in the diamond model to be able to actually link it to something.
Yeah. So yeah, and this is probably in your GitHub repo. I think there's a DHS statement that says, what's the wording? Likely? I can't remember. Is it likely state sponsored?
Without pulling it up, don't want to say it, but yeah. It's in our GitHub repo.
It's in the GitHub repo. Like, this is why I love this repo, because I can't remember 11 billion reports. So yeah, I don't know. A lot of intel gaps in this one, but it's interesting. And then just to ramble for a moment, like for many organizations, does it matter if it's Russia? Maybe, maybe not. For like US government, it probably does a lot, but all the stuff that Adam and Jen have talked through today, like you can go hunt for that and try to detect things like regardless of whether it's Russia or not. So who knows? I bet there will be more coming on that. So let's see. Ooh, one from Denise. Are we expecting more cloud-based attacks? So maybe Jen, you can talk a little bit about like anything new that you've seen on the cloud side. Like I know anticipatory intelligence is tough, but what are you seeing on the cloud side? What kind of new techniques? Is there anything you're investigating, whether it's related to SolarWinds or not?
Yeah, so I don't know if we could say that we're expecting new things on the cloud side of things. I think what this did is, there were some things like the golden SAML attack that had never been seen before in the wild. And now here's like where that actually occurs. So I think, what we can kind of think of from that is that, there is that possibility now of being able to use something like tokens to basically move laterally to the cloud. So I think that kind of just brings to light, after something like that happens, to make sure that you have detections and mitigations in place in your cloud environment. And often this is kind of like the shout out to the cloud infrastructure security people out there. I know that often that's a completely separate team within an organization from folks that are doing like host-based or network type detections. So kind of an opportunity there to make sure that what you have on that side of the house is more aligned to what's going on, like in this attack or things similar to that. But I don't know if I haven't seen anything where we expect more things in the cloud. I think this just kind of brought it all to light.
Yeah, and actually on that point, I don't know if this is the Blake, but we have a comment from a Blake. I think it's the Blake Strom, but we'll see. There could be an impersonator of Blake. But an important point that I wanted to give you a chance to chime in on. So noting that the new techniques have been around for a while, but this is one of the first times we've seen them in the wild activity. So Adam, I know that's a key thing about attack that a lot of people don't quite understand. Like attack everything adversaries do? Like, no, could you talk a little bit about what we knew or didn't know about these techniques?
Yeah, and I actually probably pass back to Jen too after I answered on sort of the cloud specific piece of this. But yeah, it's oftentimes true that we've seen red teams or people have speculated about particular attacks that it's known that it could be a possibility. But so that's some of what attack is trying to do, is to winnow down the space of the state of the possible, which is gigantic, to things that we know adversaries have done. And it ends up being a scoping function. Red teams are often far more creative, have very different restraints than real adversaries. And so even just trying to track what adversaries are doing in the wild, we end up with something like this, where we've got defense evasion going all the way almost down to my floor, and just a lot of stuff to work with already. And so it helps us get down from what could be thousands of techniques down to a known state. So there's just some downsides. That means that we're going to have gaps naturally. There are going to be things that are possible that you can't describe using attack, but it can be really used as a prioritization. I didn't know if Jen wanted to comment on the cloud specific piece.
Yeah, I definitely agree with all of that. And I think, one of the difficulties with cloud also is, like we kind of mentioned earlier, the lack of open source reporting on what's going on in the cloud. It does make things difficult. I know a lot of what I do day to day is talking to folks that do have that visibility. So even, outside of open source reporting, figuring out what's going on in that space. But yeah, I just absolutely agree with everything Adam said, other than that.
Yeah, and I think that kind of addresses another question that came in, like, what's the attack strategy to discover new TTPs before you see reporting? And I think some of that is, Jen said, with containers and cloud, like the community. That community feedback is really important. If you're seeing something in the wild, like, please reach out to the attack team, attack@mitre.org. And on that community note, someone added in, I think Cynthia and Paul both noted that Microsoft did say it was Russia apparently in Microsoft Ignite this week, but I think they cited government sources. So good looking out for that. I'll have to go back and watch that one. All right. I think probably the last question that we have time for, really important one. Can folks get cool MITRE ATT&CK merch? Like, we all have these flags. So like, if someone wanted a flag or some cool merch, like, how would they do that? Is there anywhere they could like submit a talk next year or something?
Yeah, so the flags are all from ATT&CK. They've become our traditional swag for conference speakers. Katie was one of our speakers this past year, as well as having some from being part of the team, obviously. But Yeah, it's we don't know what our plans are going to be based on COVID this year. Frankly, we've done an in-person conference a couple of Octobers. We did a virtual conference, ATT&CK Power Hour, this past fall to deal with everything going virtual, and we don't actually know what the form of ATT&CK is going to look like this year. I think there's probably going to be something though, and we normally get our call for papers open early summer. And so be keeping an eye out. Our social media, our Twitter account is usually the best way to find out about things like that. But if you want the really good swag, that's pretty much the only way to do it, other than coming to work for us.
There you go. MITRE.org. I think there are jobs, right? And otherwise watch MITRE ATT&CK for that CFP, hopefully coming out later in the year. Excellent. Well, I think we are almost up on time. So Adam, Jen, thank you so much. Hopefully we can reunite in person sometime the end of the year.
Soon,
And
hopefully soon.
Excellent. So as we start to wrap up, like you got some homework, right? Adam and Jen laid some knowledge on you. So go check out those attack techniques. If you don't understand what SAML is yet, Jen gave you a great explanation. I posted in a link to this Duo beer tent blog that I love. Like go look at that golden SAML blog from Splunk, understand those techniques. They're all in attack now, so you can go read about them. Great resource. And really take that time to understand how they work so that as someone asked, right, you can pass that off to your detection people if you're a threat intel analyst, or go hunt for them. So go take action, go really understand these techniques, look at those procedures, that deep level, and then figure out how you could maybe detect these techniques going forward, because chances are they've been used once in the wild, they're probably going to come back. And PS, Exchange admins, like go buy your Exchange admin some donuts or thank them, send them a thank you note because they're having a rough week. With that bunch of references, these slides are going to be available on the page where you registered for this webinar. We'll get them up as soon as we can within a day or two. And this was recorded, so that'll be on YouTube soon as well. With that, that's all we got. Thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you, Jen and Adam. Stay safe and take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.